Welcome everybody to Live on Mars. I'm Alex, CEO and founder of MarsBased, and in this episode we will be talking to Jamon Holmgren, one of the co-founders and the CTO of Infinite Red, a company we look up to, a React Native consultancy from the US that had a very interesting podcast back in the day called Building Infinite Red, in which they shared the internal parts, the insights of the industry of building a development agency with his co-founders and business partners, and that was equal parts interesting, educational, and fun because they have a thing for humor. Those guys over there. Anyways, with Jamon, we discuss the current state of React Native. This is a pretty technical episode, just for a change, but we also discuss the business opportunities of other technologies. We discuss the problems and the advantages of running a consultancy, how to retain talent, how to hire, how to switch technologies, how did they shift from doing a lot of services. They were just offering Ruby on Rails, they were doing Node.js back in the day, other technologies, and then they decided to laser focus on React Native, which is a pretty aggressive and interesting move, and that requires a lot of effort, but also a lot of courage, because that's betting on a single technology that for a while it will be very strong, for many years it will be strong, but eventually, as all technologies, can fade out. So maybe that's something that you can do as a relatively small company. I mean, they are bigger than us, but they are not 300 people, definitely. And maybe they're looking to go back in a couple years, maybe in 5 years' time, they will be looking back to expand their tool belt in order to service more clients and to de-risk their adventure, because betting on a single technology can be pretty risky, but can also reap great benefits, as Jamon mentions in this episode. Without further ado, let's jump right into this episode with Jamon Holmgren. So they say basically the best time to run agencies or create agencies is during crisis, and looks like we're in for a good one right now. So talking about, this is a podcast where we discuss innovation, we discuss technology, and there's a whole lot of podcasts about startups out there. We organize an event that's called Startup Grind, but people are asking me all the time, why did you build an agency, not a product company? And I want to hear your take on that, because running an agency is fun.
Absolutely. And I think that it is something that, like, I think a lot of people who have experience with agencies often associate it with a grind. There's like, you're kind of like being ground into the ground. You're kind of being worked too hard. You're pushed. Got to get those billable hours in, things like that. And so I totally understand why they would say, why would you sign up for that? Why would that be something you'd want to do? I started way back in the day, 17, almost 18 years ago now. And I started my company when I was 23. And I would say I kind of didn't know any better. At the time, I was just trying to build websites, sell website projects, things like that. So I started there by default. I didn't have a product idea. In fact, it didn't even occur to me that you could build products on the web. I just thought of the web as being websites, over time, then eventually I got to where I was building web apps and stuff like that, but I was building it for other people, and I really enjoyed that. I would say that for a while, I sort of had what a lot of agencies had, which was like, why don't I, build something myself? I have the ability to. Why don't I? But the reality is that as a programming nerd, I've been doing this since I was 12. When you build a product, you don't become a programming nerd. You become a whatever the product is about nerd. So if your product is about, note-taking, you become a note-taking nerd. You have to really be good at note-taking. You have to really understand note-taking. The programming part of it is just sort of a means to an end. And I think that really didn't appeal to me, because to me, I wanted to be all about programming. Now, we could build, developer tools and stuff like that, but then you get pretty stuck in whatever developer tools you're focusing on. We do, actually. We have some products. They're open source. They're not monetized, but you could call them products, things like Ignite and Reactitron and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I really like how consulting allows us to be focused around the programming and around the software development part of things.
Yeah, but we also get stuck a lot in like business, people management. So at the very end of the day, we're just doing every other company's work in terms of like revising contracts. I've been doing some GDPR stuff today, doing sales prospects and whatnot.
Right.
But incidentally, you've answered one of the questions that I always get. I'm pretty sure you always get these terrible questions like, when potential customers approach you and they're pitching you their idea and they're asking for a quote, and they're like, "How do I know you're not going to steal my idea?" And you're like, "Because I don't care. Like, if I had to steal everybody's ideas,
Yeah.
like I would be running that company, not an agency, right?
Yeah.
I just want you to pay for my services, and that's it. I don't want to be a product person. First, because I think it's different kind of people, right? And second is like we don't have the chops, as you mentioned. Like we also have got some open source projects and whatnot, but we tried unsuccessfully to build a product back in the day, and it just requires a different set of people: sales, outbound, marketers, And so I think you already answered that, but I think it's a good time to plug your previous podcast, which I think I should mention I listen to it like at least once a year, something like that, because it's so good. Like Building Infinite Red, right? And if you can mention it and explain briefly what it was about, because I think it was really good, valuable content out there.
So so about 10 years into my first agency, I met a couple of other guys, actually 3 other guys, Ken Miller, Todd Worth, and Gant Laborde. And we decided that we were going to merge our companies together. So at the beginning, it was just me, Todd, and Ken. And when we kind of got things together, we would have these long discussions, in Zoom. And it was really great. And eventually I was like, why don't we do a podcast? Because there's so many cool things that we talk about that it feels like we could just make this a public discussion and people would enjoy it. And so Building Infinite Red, which is building.infinite.red on the web, you can go find it, was born. And we went through the first season, and then Gant actually joined as an owner for the second season. And Ken left us, actually, incidentally, to go work for a product company. And because it turns out that it really is 2 different type of people. And for him, the idea of doing consulting, just didn't match well with what he wanted to do. It's totally fine. What's really cool is that we're still good friends with Ken. We went and Gant and I were down there last April and went to his house and went to lunch with him, and we're great friends with him. But it's just it works better with certain personalities. So Building Infinite Red was born. We did 1 season. We did another season. We've talked about a 3rd season. We want to do a 3rd season. But in the meantime, we had sort of gotten to where we had said what we wanted to say. And I think we would have to relaunch it with maybe a little different focus, because a lot of the stuff just holds up over time.
It does. It surprisingly does.
Surprisingly well. Yeah. Pre-pandemic, it wasn't. Like we weren't doing this when everybody was remote and stuff like that. So there's maybe some new things to talk about.
That was way back, way before people started jumping on the cool wagon of doing podcasts. Like must have been like 2017, 18, something like that. When you guys
that's when we did the podcast, but we were remote in 2014. So almost 10 years ago.
Because I met Ken, must have been like 2015, something like that in San Francisco. That's my original connection to Infinite Red. And one of the reasons I bring this up is because oftentimes, and you will also know this, is agencies, and more so bootstrap companies. Agencies usually are bootstrap, are perceived as unambitious projects, right?
Yeah, it's true.
However, we stand the test of time because right now, like companies are going down like flies, and especially startups, right? Or companies that are based solely on growth and no real financials to back them.
Yeah.
So they're favorable weather companies, fair weather companies, I think you call them, right, in English. So my point being, there's not a lot of literature around building agencies. Like everybody tells you about building product, the ABC of entrepreneurship, right? Get some friends, get a co-founder, talk to customers, find an idea, find product market fit, ideally not raise capital in the meantime, but a lot of people have to because they're just not good at sales. Build something, try to scale it up, blah, 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 raise another round after like every 12 months, raise some money. and so on and so forth, right? However, if you're trying to learn how to create an agency, there's not a lot of good content out there. It just I think people assume that it's kind of like freelancing, but scaling it up. There's so many things that just don't fit this description. So that's why I think that podcast, if you really want to start an agency, you should consume it from beginning to end, right?
It's really I appreciate that. That's really kind of you to say. And you're right. There really isn't like a model to follow there. I think partially because, a lot of Silicon Valley kind of looks down their nose a little bit. The ones that are, the big ones out there, Pivotal and whatnot, they have a certain kind of goal and way of working that, fits what they like to do. And I'm connected with a lot of, people that are in operations and leadership within larger agencies. And they do have a different mindset. It's very much like push type of a mindset. There's sort of this like, kind of negative wording of saying that oh, you're building a lifestyle business, like a business that's sort of like built around your life rather than trying to be ambitious. And I get that, but I don't optimize for dollars and cents necessarily. I don't optimize for perceived stature in the world. We do optimize for certain types of impact. So impact is part of it. One of our core pillars is significant positive impact. But we feel like we can do that in different ways than building some sort of, startup that changes the world. What we really love at the end of the day is to work and build things with our friends and, build things with people that we care about and build a great life for our families. Happiness, we're optimizing for happiness and fulfillment and contentedness, things like that. And at the end of the day, you can kind of like throw away your family and throw away your personal life and your health and everything else and chase the dollar or, the big splashy startup. And then what, someone else probably runs it after a while and you're stuck there with not a lot. You have a lot of money, but like what else? So I really think that, there's this, I've told this story countless times and it's not my story, but it's a kind of a parable, if you will, that I think is very interesting. There's this fisherman who he takes his boat out and he goes fishing in the morning. He goes from, he sleeps in. So he's probably going out around, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, depending on the day, go out and he'll catch a couple fish. And then he comes back in and by noon and, he has lunch with his wife and he takes a siesta. And then maybe he goes into town and he, kind of hangs out with his friends, has some wine. And then, he and his wife go dancing in the evening and then he goes and hangs out with his kids and goes to sleep. In the morning he does it again. And one day a businessman is there. He's on vacation in this, this kind of like fishing village, and he sees this guy going out and doing that. He says, "Why do you just stop at noon? Why don't you keep fishing until 5 o'clock? Why don't you work harder?" And the guy says, "Well, why would I do that?" He said, "Well, you can take the extra fish that you catch and you can sell them and you'd get more money. And then you could buy a bigger boat and you'd get more fish because you could hire people to come on the boat, help you with it. And then eventually you could get many boats and, have a whole fleet of fishing boats and be managing all of that. And, you'd just be doing really well." And the fisherman said, "Well, what would I do then?" He said, "Well, you could sell the thing. You could, you could go public or something. You could really make tons and tons of money. And you could retire early." And the guy says, "Well, what would I do after I retire?" And he says, "Well, you could sleep in, you could go out fishing, you could come back in, have lunch, take a nap, go dancing, have some wine, hang out with your kids and go to sleep." It's the same thing at the end of the day. You're the fisherman and the businessman. He's like, "I'm already doing that. Like make a business that allows you to have the life that you want rather than, some future far off thing that at the end of the day really isn't that fulfilling anyway."
That's a great story. Actually, while were telling it, I was like, I'm always thinking about the incentives people have when they ask about something, right? And in this case, it's like, well, this businessman, his incentive is I can probably partner with this person. I can make some profit by literally just outsourcing the work and just reaping the benefits, right? While the other person are like, I'm just going to work more for, maybe more money, but then just my incentive is not that. My incentive is my independence. And that's where I think that companies like yours and ours is like so like-minded, because we understand that. And when we've had exactly these same proposals several times via merger and acquisition or bigger clients, or even like some people are like, hey, we will invest in your company. You will recruit, like you will replicate this, scale it, and have like 300 people, 3,000 engineers. And I was like, what for? Like, so that you can make money? What am I going to get? Oh yeah, but there's potentially you can make like millions of dollars and whatnot. It's like, do I have to work a lot? Yes. I'm not interested. Like, we're trying to look for ways to work less, not more, make more money, because it's not our main driver, but one of the drivers behind this company is profit. It's not in like it's not revenue, it's profit, right? The other is independence, and the third one might be the quality of our outcome. That being said, you mentioned something, you just went around very lightly on something. I want you to go a little bit deeper on that. You mentioned that you like working with friends, and in the ABC of entrepreneurship, usually, because VCs own that narrative, therefore the whole thing about lifestyle business being lazy and unambitious, the ABC of entrepreneurship usually has set in stone things like don't do business with friends, don't do business with family, don't be four founders of the same profile, don't be a solo founder, don't, a lot of don'ts, right? How many of these don'ts have you broken? And has any of these have really worked out the way you expected, or went wrong, or went sideways? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've certainly broken probably them all, and many of them have worked out poorly. To be honest, there is some value
that's surprising.
in some of those.
I expected the other. I expected the
right. Yeah. I hired mostly friends and relatives when I first started, and very few of them continue to work for me to this day. But I guess when I say that, when I say working with friends, it really has to do with our mindset. It has to do with the way that I would treat all of my employees. Not every one of my employees would consider me a friend, nor maybe the other way, but certainly I would try to treat them in the same way that I would a friend.
Awesome.
And it's just fun. It's just fun to work with talented people who enjoy their job, and we enjoy working together. I think there's a very valid point out in the developer world that if a company starts saying that you're family, then look out, because they're about to screw you. And I get that, because it's used to sort of leverage over people. But if someone says you're family and then they go out of their way to support you in a way that doesn't advantage them, that's a very different story. And we try to be that, where we are not optimizing for our benefit over theirs. We have to run a business, we have to be sustainable, things like that, and we don't want to be taken advantage of. But we try to have an open hand. We try to have an open, kind of just the way that we're gonna trust people. We're going to treat them with respect, things like that. We're also going to understand who they are as people, and understand that they are whole people with whole lives, not just who they are at work. And what we find is, even going beyond just that's the right thing to do, it also leads to better work, because if people know that you've got their back when there is something that isn't ideal in their lives, then they're able to bring their whole self to work, and they are able to bring all of their, like, we try to put them in places where they actually really have strengths, where they're good at it. They don't even have to think about it. It's just what they do. It's stuff that they do. There's someone maybe who you put them into a position and they love to tinker with something and make it faster. Well, guess what? Our clients need people to make their apps faster, more performant. but that's just what they do. They can't stand how slow it is, so they make it better.
Right on.
Things like that. You try to put them in places where their strengths really stand out. And I would, try to treat a friend that way, the same way.
Because you brought a really good point in which we should be highlighting a little bit more the benefits of working in an agency, in a consultancy, call it however. I think like 10 years in the business, I still don't know the difference between agency and consultancy. Maybe it's with regards to the pricing and whatnot, like the kind of excellence that you're supposed to deliver. Being ex-Deloitte myself, former Deloitte myself, I know that we get a bad rap, consultancies, because they tend to charge a lot of money for doing shit work. And I've seen that work and I didn't want to partake of that. And that's why we decided to turn it around and build this kind of business, right? So I always say I was saying that I learned a lot how to do things, but also how not to do the things, especially how not to do things in these big consultancies, right? And we probably should be selling this more, especially in nowadays when we, after layoff season and whatnot, that maybe startups are not as ideal as people think, because from the outside they're always perceived like a nice place to work, all of these perks and innovating. There's always like these bleeding edge technologies and whatnot, and you're at the forefront of the industry. However, when the headwinds are coming, then you get to see like these massive layoffs, the change of the culture. Then when a new VC comes and changes, or the board decides something, the board decides that you have to fire 15% of your workforce. The board told me so, right? And so no ownership whatsoever, huge rotation. There's a lot of employee attrition in startups lately. And so you see that companies, I don't know about you, I don't know your numbers, but in 9 years of a company in MarsBased, 3 developers have walked out of the company only, right? And so your numbers are probably similar, and the main reason is because we don't change, right? Yeah. Obviously, we don't go to hire the developer that wants to go for the next shit hot startup that just raised a huge amount of money and that they like hopping between companies. But if you hire the right people, they will stay with you forever, right? So what are the things that you think you optimize for when hiring or keeping people in the company? Because I think that these kind of benefits don't get often spoken about.
I absolutely love that approach. And I do think that, optimizing for retention for long-term is something that so few tech companies do. And kudos to you and what you've been able to build. We do have similar numbers. We haven't lost anybody in probably 2.5 years, something like that. And before that, we had a few leave who probably didn't fit 100% anyway. But then we had like the first 3 years of our consultancy, we didn't have anybody leave either. So it was a point of pride for us, and it continues to be. Not that people can't move on, sometimes life circumstances change and things like that. But we definitely optimize for that. And I can definitely say that you just have to look at retention numbers to see kind of how a company is. It's definitely it's a big piece of it. As far as the types of people that we like to bring on board, a lot of times I think that less experienced people that come on board, I won't say young, because it's not always young people. It's just people maybe who haven't had a wide variety of experiences. When they come on board, they don't always appreciate necessarily what we're doing. But if you get someone who has worked in the startup world, who has worked for other consultancies, for big consultancies, who has done work for enterprise, they come into a company like MarsBased or Infinite Red, and they're like, I see what you're doing here. I see what you're doing here. I understand what you're doing here. This is very cool. This is something that you're optimizing for the right things, because I had all of this kind of like PTSD from all of these other things that have happened to me in my career. And I feel safe here. I feel like I can be who I want to be. I can have the ambition and whatnot. One of the things that I was worried about, because I'm the type of person who will get bored if I'm just stuck doing the same thing year after year after year. I was worried about our people liking who we were, but then eventually getting bored and saying like,
because of the model, because you always get to work on other people's projects.
It's really just because like, okay, well, we're successful doing React Native. Great. But after 7-8 years of it, I'd like to try something else, and so what I've always told people is I'm building the type of company I would want to work at. And part of that is the ability to have finished my career and not feel like I missed out, and the cool thing about being a consultancy is that you get to work with all of the crazy hot, startups if you want to, like if they fit your model. But at the end of the day, you're not subject to their board deciding to lay you off. If they cancel our contract, which happens, we go find another contract and we go find another project, but you get to continue to work with the same people. So that's definitely the hope. And I do think that people who have been around the block, who understand, who have seen, the non-ideal situations, they appreciate what we bring to the table more so than maybe someone new to the industry.
Right on. And well, precisely one of the strong points of working at a consultancy, I always mention that, is that you will change sectors without having to change company, right? So you could be today working by a mobility company, and then next year in an IoT company, then doing fintech, then doing NFTs, and the same company at MarsBased,
Exactly.
And so, but it kind of like relates to something that I get a lot of requests for. I need a CTO, I need a technical co-founder. Can you help me find developers? We're not a headhunting company, but of course we're really well connected in the industry. We have our contacts, but it's like, and I always answer back. So what kind of people or what kind of persona are you looking for? And they say literally just developers, send me anything. And they're like, I'm not going to help you, because if you're hiring just everything or anything and everything, then you're just hiring for, like, you will not have great results. You will have a lot of employee attrition. We have nailed down the kind of person that we want to work for, or we want to work with. And you mentioned it. So it's very related to what we do. We go usually for people who work in old school companies, like, these kind of big consultancies, SMBs, not in startups, just because they will see huge contrast between their working conditions, their laptop, they have a dress code, things like that, and what we can offer at MarsBased. That being said, this helps to also create a more cohesive group of people, like-minded, maybe not super diverse, but definitely then stay super long in the company. Some of our people have been like 5, 7, 8 years into the company. But anyways, my point being, in this case, how do you get to define the exact person that wants to work for in this kind of company? Because we need to hire people who want to be consultants. You have to be a developer, but you got to talk to the client. You got to report. You got to communicate using, I don't know, Linear, Basecamp, Jira, whichever tool you use. It's not purely working only with your team, your squad, your whatever. So how do you define your worker persona in your company?
Yeah, I think that we start off by doing a lot of media around React Native. So first off, you have to be kind of interested in what we do, obviously. And that has been good about, it brings in people. Secondly, our careers form, a lot of people just throw together a careers form or say, like, send me a resume. I'm not a fan of that. What I like to do is really spend a lot of time on the careers form, crafting it to really, and it's not like a long careers form, but it's crafted through a lot of thought, discussion, internal, back and forth, to be a couple of things. One is it's recruiting. Like, the form itself is recruiting. It's like showing people who we are and selling them on our vision immediately, right away. Secondly, it also is a filter. So it takes the people who don't fit what we're trying to do, and it makes it so that it's probably awkward for them to answer some questions. And that's good. That's on purpose. If they feel awkward answering some questions, then they're probably not going to enjoy working at Infinite Red. So we try to optimize for those things. And only lastly, is it a communication method for giving us the information so that we can decide whether they're a good fit to move forward or not. So before it even hits our inbox, it's already accomplished a couple of things, which is really cool. And then, of course, we really try to filter by only having people, we only really advertise when we're hiring through React Native Radio, our React Native podcast. So if someone is listening to React Native Radio, they're already a certain type of person. They're someone who not only is interested in React Native, but interested enough to go out and actually listen to a podcast about it. And that right there helps us find people who are interested in media, who are interested in, kind of furthering our reach. That's that significant positive impact I talked about earlier. So since we started doing that, I think that the type of people that we've attracted to Infinite Red has really fit that mold. And they actually have been fairly diverse in that way. We've found some different perspectives for sure. And I really love that about that approach. But yeah, that's kind of what we do.
I don't know, like I'm gonna open up here a little bit and be super honest, but I think that pretty much every marketing thing that we've done at MarsBased was looking to get clients, right? Was with the objective of getting clients. What we ended up always getting was potential candidates and talent, right? So we organize events, and instead of getting clients, we found people we hired. We launched a podcast, we launched a blog, and everything has gotten us only talent, not clients. Luckily, clients come from other sources, right? But I think that also speaks a lot about the things that we don't know as business owners, in my case, in our case, first-time entrepreneurs and business owners, and then we thought that, magically, just, you start doing some stuff on social media, you write a blog, you do some SEO, it's going to get you clients. No, maybe it works for certain companies, but what are the chances that people just Google these our services? It's not that big, right? Well, true. Anyways, the other thing is, like, I wanted to switch gears a little bit here and talk a little bit more about technology, because you guys did a very interesting, I wouldn't call it pivot necessarily, but change of strategy in centering or zeroing in on React Native, right? You used to do more technology. I remember Ruby on Rails back in the day. I don't know if you still do it or not, but you basically changed a lot, and the whole marketing strategy with the launch of the podcast, organizing and sponsoring events and whatnot. So was that something that happened organically? What difficulties did you find along this kind of change or pivot or transition, however you want to call it?
Yeah. So we did backend, we did Rails, as you mentioned, we did native app development, mobile app development. We did some web, we did some Next.js, we did a bunch of different things, and we eventually moved over and we were doing Elixir Phoenix. We started doing a little bit of Node backend. So we had a variety of things happening. But the conference that Gant, Todd, and I and Ken met at was a mobile app development conference. And that's what we really enjoyed. That's what we really focused on. Anytime something like that would come through, we would be really happy. And if it was a different technology, then it would be, okay, at least it pays the bills. But as we developed more and more of a reputation within the React Native community, we got more and more traction there. And it got to the point where we were moving our backend developers over to React Native just constantly. And it got to where it was a big percentage of what we did. Now, web is still so huge that we were still doing a lot of React. And I got to give kudos to our CEO and my co-founder, Todd Worth, because he came in one day and we were doing an ownership meeting. He says, let's stop doing all the other stuff. Let's just do React Native. Let's say no to any new project that's not React Native. And it kind of surprised us. It surprised me to a certain extent. It felt a little scary, but he said, this is why we need to focus. Our people are too stretched thin. They can't focus on being good at React Native because they're having to also do this random Next project or random, Node project or whatever. And we said, okay, let's do it. This was like, we had started this conversation. It didn't happen fully until like really January of 2021. The transition had happened a lot earlier because we had started to already go that direction, but making that last leap was sort of a leap of faith still, like saying no to a project that we probably felt like we needed, and just saying, no, we're not going to do it. And that was the best decision we ever made. It was an incredibly good decision.
Sounds surprising. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I could cut you
Yeah,
off.
no, I actually want you to go ahead. Yeah.
Because it's surprising for two things. First one, it comes from the CEO, not the CTO, deciding on technology. That's surprising, to say the least.
Yeah.
And the second is that's putting all your eggs in one basket, because React Native is gonna go away eventually.
It will.
Maybe not next week, maybe not in a year's time. Some technologies never fade away, but I don't know. They go out of vogue eventually. So it's surprising by these two factors. So as a CTO, how did you perceive this? Was it like shocking? Was it like he was trying to step on your toes or something? Or
no, I didn't. It didn't cross my mind at all. Well, for one thing, he is a developer. So he comes from a development background. He was actually the one to push us into React Native originally. So he did the research and stuff. He doesn't do a lot of development anymore. Oh, almost none, really. I'm probably do the most out of the ownership group. But that part didn't really cross my mind. It was more the business side of it, because we run things at Infinite Red as Todd likes to call it, a council of elders. We are three owners, but also we have three leaders, that are not in ownership, and we really value everybody's input. But it was really more the business side of it that was like, oh, I don't know, that seems like a lot, but it was fantastic. We told our team, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be spec ops. We're going to just be really good at React Native. All you have to do with your, getting better time is to get good at React Native. And what happened was we just started getting more and more clients that understood who we were. Before, it would be like, hey, what's Infinite Red? Oh, well, we are a remote agency that does a number of different technologies, and we can build you apps in a lot of different places. And it's like, okay, well, a lot of consultancies can do that, like a lot of them. But when we said we're a consultancy that specializes in React Native, is hired by the biggest companies in the world to help them develop and train their React Native developers, architect their apps and help them through transitions, and launch their React Native apps successfully, it becomes a much better pitch, because someone's got that problem. Someone comes to us. I'm thinking of one right now, company, it's a big company that came to us and said, hey, we are looking to transfer over from native. It's an old native app, a big one, has over 4 million ratings on the App Store, and 4.8 stars. So you don't want to mess it up, right? And we want to move it over to React Native though, and here are our reasons. So they had some reasons about that, and but we don't feel like we can do it without someone helping us do that transition. Exactly. And so it just becomes like there's this internal sort of joke, but it's sort of true, that nobody will get fired for hiring Infinite Red to help them with their React Native transition.
Oh my God. So you made it to that status.
It's like IBM, right? Nobody got fired for hiring IBM. But that's how I feel. Like, we're the safe choice. We're the choice that you do when you want it to work. Now, it's going to cost you some money for sure, but it's going to work. We're going to do it, and it's going to work. You're just kind of buying peace of mind. You're buying security that this is going to happen. And our people have been doing React Native since it came out. So they've hit every bump. They've hit every branch on the way down. It's absolutely, we felt all the bruises. But because of that, we can help you through that. None of these problems we haven't seen before. And I think that's a much more powerful pitch. It not only helps when we're marketing, because now we know how we market ourselves, but also in a sales call, we can sit there and tell them exactly who we are, what our credentials are. It also focuses our media efforts: React Native Radio, React Native Newsletter, Chain React, our conference, React Native live streaming, our blog post, Redshift, our, all of my tweets, everything that we're doing on media is focused on React Native. And that is really, really helpful. With that said, React Native will not be forever. We know that. I'm 41. The likelihood that it sticks around till I retire, very unlikely. So we have to be thinking out further than that. Yeah.
Let's talk about that. Yeah, just go on, continue.
Absolutely.
So where do you see this is going, and for how long? Because there are new technologies coming up all the time, and which are supposedly challenging React Native in the same way that probably Golang should have killed Ruby 10 years ago, and it just didn't fucking happen, right? So and some other things, like I don't know if Flutter is really challenging React Native. It probably is. We see it. We get some because we also do React Native, but like we get Flutter deal flow, but not as much quality either. So my point being, is it like still the strongest force in the market for hybrid mobile development? And of course, Ionic hasn't never been to the same level of quality, even if they turn into a real company, even if they raise some funds, and it's way better now than when we used to do it. But we never felt bad about moving on from Ionic. And so what's the future got in store for React Native? Where do you see it going to?
I think that when I look at the industry and where mobile app development is, I don't see anything that's transformational beyond React Native. React Native is good enough in every possible aspect. Even its biggest criticisms, which are around performance and whatnot, are surmountable problems. And the developer experience continues to get better and better every release. So because of that, I look at it and I say, yeah, it's good enough, and that means it's going to stick around. It is absolutely the behemoth. It is, and the whole reason it's the behemoth is because of React Web. Why would you, if you are a React shop, you're already building React web interfaces and experiences, why would you choose Flutter? You wouldn't do that. You would say, no, if they're reasonably close, I'll use the technology and tools and developers already have and go with React Native. That's the reason. Even if Flutter is a little bit better, if it's 1.5 times better, it's not enough to make it like, no, we're going to use Flutter. Native has its own problems. Certainly we did it back in the day, and you can still do it. But that brings its own set of problems. A lot of it organizationally, like having 3 separate teams, web, iOS, and Android, is not a good situation for most companies. It's actually, it's more poisonous than you think it is. It really is. It has a lot of problems. And I'm not saying that as a dig on native developers or web developers at all. Native developers are fantastic developers, but it's just organizationally, it's structurally, it's built into the system. So from my standpoint, aligning all of the teams with React Native just still makes so much sense. And React is still, the elephant in the room. With all of that said, I think eventually React Native will be replaced with something. I have some ideas on what that might be, but nothing has even remotely come close to that yet. So we are looking not to replace React Native, but what we are looking to do for the future is to move into a related and complementary technology that will allow us to continue to do React Native plus this other technology as well as we can, to the point where we become the best shop for React Native, also the best shop for this other technology, and certainly the best shop for if you need React Native and this other technology.
It's one of the things, like when you're running an agency, if you are a boutique agency, and you guys were one and you still are, when we started it was only Ruby and Angular, right? We needed something for the back, something for the front. Eventually you grow a team, you have done several projects, you start tinkering with some other technology that you are not particularly keen on, but you see there's a lot of market demand for, right? So in our case, it was React. In our case, it was first, I think we went into Node.js in the backend because the client was like, hey, can you guys do it? It's like, oh, well, not really, but happy to take a look because we know it's coming on strong. That was 2016, I think. And then eventually we moved also into React, and we moved on from Angular. We still do some Angular here and there, but we get 95% of our front-end leads are are React and Vue, but not Angular anymore. And so, but you grow a team, you start creating like smaller teams that know this and that. And we face the same problem as you guys. At the same time, we think it would be a bigger problem to scale back and just have one technology, because of what you mentioned. Like, you need to transform into the team, so train it. You need to teach the clients, which I think I suppose it was something painful for you and for your clients, or convince them to move to these other technologies. So you change your business, effectively speaking. You have built your reputation and your SEO and your network on some technology, and then you move on, right? Why am I mentioning this? Because right now we're exploring the possibility of incorporating Python into our tech stack. Probably ditching Node.js, because Node.js, we haven't really liked all the 6 years we've been doing. It's like not a good technology. Like, it's not a good technology. It's like, it just doesn't riff well with Rails. It just doesn't go well with other things. It's just like, it just feels too much like, sorry for Node.js people, just feels like the new PHP, right? There are no really senior people there. The code is a mess. It's just like a clusterfuck of different modules and whatnot. It's difficult. It's difficult to get a clean, big project, right? And so, whereas Ruby, more opinionated people, arrogant people, perhaps, if you will, but the code is clean, maintainable, things long term, things kind of like work at the start. So Python feels like a natural transition, but also because we get a lot of deal flow. And it's like, okay, we're exploring that. How did you guys transition out from the projects whose technologies you are not interested in keeping? Or did you keep them for their natural, life cycle until the contract expires, something like that? How did you transition out?
Yeah, we did that with almost every project, where we just kind of let it transition out, and then anything new was all React Native and moving them over. Luckily, we were at a place where there wasn't much of our schedule that was that way. There is one notable exception to that. There's this university client that we've had for 8 or 9 years now, doing Ruby on Rails, and we have a team on that. Only one of which is actually on our core team. The rest are contractors that are contracted specifically for that one. So we do have one core team member just kind of managing that division. We don't talk about it a lot. It's very, very out of the ordinary. The only real reason that it's there is because
are you ashamed?
They do good work. Our employee there, Darren Wilson, is happy enough doing it, and he enjoys the people he works with. He enjoys the technology, the Rails kind of stuff. Does a great job, is pretty low maintenance. We don't have to be messing with it too much. So at the end of the day, us just kind of maintaining that relationship with that university and continuing to supply a team is pretty low cost. But there are often some discussions internally, like, when do we get rid of that? Because, it'd be nice to just focus on this. It'll probably happen at some point. But everything else, though, there have been some clients who have come along and said, hey, we have a React Native app and we also have this other thing that we want to do. And then it's a big question of like, do we do the React Native app plus the other thing? When we've decided to do that, it's usually been a mistake. What happens is we finish the React Native app and then we're stuck on this React project, web project, for forever. And, our people don't want that. Our people want to work on React Native with everybody else so they can share knowledge and get help from everybody and things like that. So we are more and more saying, no, we'll only do the React Native side. And we'll have someone else help with the React side. But generally speaking, where we fit in the best is when they already have a React.js team and they're already doing that. They just need help with the mobile app.
Yeah, but like the probably the good part about doing this is you're perceived as the leader in the industry. Yeah. You are the experts, and so therefore you get more higher quality deal flow, if you will, because big ass companies will come to you like, we need to optimize this, and you're the experts. Because one hidden truth or unspoken truth in the industry is, not a single company gets all the best developers in the world, and like, for the same reason, we've been hired by really big companies like Rakuten or some of the biggest consultants in Spain, because they're like, we could do this internally, but we have this employee attrition and we need experts. We need 3 Angular experts, but we only have got 1 available, right? So that's why we're outsourcing. And we need to optimize this big Ruby application for Rakuten. It's like, granted, Rakuten have got some of the best developers in the world, but they're not always available, or they don't have enough of them at the same time, right? So that's why they looking for these super specific partners that are specialized and boutique and this, this kind of craft that we've got that generic agencies don't have. That being said, however, you lose the kind of deal flow. It's a trade-off, right? Because you lose the deal flow of companies who want a one-stop shop, where like you guys do mobile. Yeah, we also need help on the back end. We also need help with some integrations. We also need help with our Salesforce and ERP. Right. What are you happy with that decision? I take it that it's on the client side, it's happy, but it's easy to face, but you will lose some talent, right? If there are some companies just want to move on, do other things, not only React Native, or how does it go with the talent part of the company?
You're talking about our employees or
your employees? Yeah.
I think that so far we have not run into that really at all, because React Native actually has a pretty massive surface area. There's so many different technologies within React Native. I mean, we're talking about, let me just list the languages that you need to learn in order to do React Native. Yeah. Okay. Clearly JavaScript, TypeScript. On the native side, you have Objective-C, Java, Kotlin, Swift. You also have C++. And on the tooling side, you have Ruby, Groovy. And sometimes, there's also an argument to be made that you also need to know some amount of HTML and CSS, even though they're not used directly in the project. There's sort of references between them. You kind of have to know that. React Native Web means that you are working on a web context, and so you do need to know more about the web as well as, in sort of like a browser context. There's the new architecture, there's the old architecture, the native side, which is a whole another thing. You have to know GraphQL, REST, socket connections, TRPC, like there's an endless list of things that you need to learn. And there's integrations with different SDKs. There's mono repos and non-mono repos. There's brownfield and greenfield. I could keep going for another 15 minutes of stuff that is literally stuff ongoing right now within Infinite Red. And basically the variety that you get just within this one technology, I think scratches that itch. If we were just only really, 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 really good at, I don't know, Node, I think that we'd probably get bored. But if we took on a technology that does require some real expertise. And that's why when someone comes to React Native from React.js, it can feel a little overwhelming, because React.js, you need to know JavaScript, TypeScript, HTML, CSS, and maybe a few other things that I mentioned, but not much beyond that. There's plenty to learn there. Certainly people have built whole careers on everything React.js. That's fine. But now you stack on all these other technologies, all these other contexts, all these other paradigms, all these other languages, and it's just a monumental amount of stuff to learn. So from my perspective, that's kind of kept people going. But again, we're also looking at some other things to move into. There's a lot of interest within Infinite Red in moving into some other directions. And it's stuff that I think will be really good for Infinite Red as well as people's careers, and something really different for people to learn.
Something you can share about, or
it's AI related. No one
listens to this podcast. No,
okay. It's AI related, and I will be talking more about it as time goes on.
Okay,
but yeah, AI related.
Less gardening in your tweets, more AI. Come on.
Exactly.
Just kidding. Okay, last question, and this one is the signature question of the podcast, and I think I'm suspecting you will give a very good answer about this. We always have our guests share the biggest technical fuck up they've ever done, so it needs to be owned up by you, not the usual bullshit of I hired the wrong person. No, just like something you committed, like you wiped out the production database, something like that. And how much money did it cost to the company?
Boy, that one is that's a tough one.
It's a tough one when you don't have any, or when you have too many.
Yeah, no. So in the last 8 years, we've been mostly working, on the client side. So we're not necessarily deleting stuff out of a production database. But I can tell a story about there way back in the day, when I was still pretty much lead coder. We had a gigantic project, way too ambitious. The guy came to us with like the whole thing mapped out, and one of the things he told me when he met with me is, I don't want to hear a word about an MVP. Like, I want the whole thing, And so I said, okay, if that's what you want, it's going to be very expensive. It's going to be huge, a lot of money. I hope you are good at raising money. And he was very good at raising money. Not so good at product, but he was good at raising money. And we built,
right? One compensates the other.
Man, we built a native app, just iOS in this case, not just, it was iOS and iPad.
Yeah.
And we built a Rails backend, a gigantic one, and also an Ember front end.
So back in the day, they riffed on well with each other, right?
Yeah.
Rails and Ember was quite a good
Rails and Ember, kind of went hand in hand. And then native iOS, iPad, iPhone and iPad app. And as we went into it, the thing that makes this maybe not as good of a story is that he really didn't have a lot of users. If he had a lot of users, this would have been a bigger deal. But essentially we were building out this thing, and he says no MVP, but you always have to, leave certain things for later. You can't just do everything all at once, or you'll never launch, right? We got to a point where it was like beta users are starting to use this, and it's starting to maybe go a little bit. Had no chance of ever making it anywhere. It's way too complicated. People would sit there and like try to figure out the app and could not figure out what it even did. Like, why am I using this an hour later? Like, this doesn't seem to make sense. It has everything in it and nothing at the same time. But we had a database that it had backups, but the backups had started to fail and we didn't notice, apparently.
Ooh,
and
I see where this is headed to.
and it ran out of storage space for the database, because we were dumping everything in there. It wasn't the biggest thing. It was kind of a starter one. So I just stopped recording data. And now, luckily, we were able to, this was like a couple months that we lost of data. Luckily, we were able to rebuild it using transaction data that we had, but it took a while, and we had to sit there and like spend a lot of time. So I think I couldn't give you a monetary amount, but it was two of us developers for like 3 weeks of like making sure that, we had everything right, because we had to manually check things and, is this right? It was a disaster. At the end of the day, though, that startup had no chance of making it anyway. At the end of the day, I really should have said, when he came to me, you got to do an MVP. You're never going to know what your customers want just dreaming it up on your own, but he didn't want to hear that.
And that's one of the hardest parts of like running a company like ours, is that sometimes you know better than the client, but at the end of the day, they are so obstinate, and if they really want to hire you to do this, like, look, you can pass on the deal, of course,
right?
But it really depends on whether you've got enough deal flow or not. And you're like, okay, let's try to coach them into doing something else. Might happen, might not happen. So it's hard to pass on these kind of deals. Anyways, thank you very much, Jamon. One last minute for you. I'm rolling the carpet for you. What are you guys working on? What do you want to plug? Just use this minute to promote anything that you find interesting.
I think biggest thing is Chain React. It's our conference coming up in May 17th through 19th. It's in Portland, Oregon, in the U.S. It's a React Native conference. 400, 500 React Native developers get together. We have amazing talks from Meta. We have a couple of talks from Microsoft about React. These are all React Native. No React, talks. These are all React Native, 100%. We have Shopify. We have just so many different speakers. Just some great speakers from across the board. We have people from other agencies out there, like CallStack and Software Mansion and some of the other big ones. everybody who's anybody's there, and it's a fantastic conference, May 17th through 19th. I definitely recommend you go check it out. We love seeing people there. Anybody who's interested in React Native or does React Native, we really put on a great conference. So go to chainreactconf.com.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Alex. Really appreciate it.